Welcome, everyone. For those who I have not met yet, my name is Alana. I am the Director of Coaching. With me today, co-teaching is, and let me actually change this so you guys can see. With me today, co-teaching is Rachel.
Hello.
Can you guys hear Rachel if she stands over there?
Hey, Rachel.
Hi, Rachel. Yes.
Oh, all right. So we're both going to be, you're getting both of us today teaching. And today is, some of you have attended or have seen our classes in the past where it was called intensive contracts. And that class was an all-day class that went through buyer and listing. What we decided to do for this new year is really break it out. So today is all about the buyer. Next week is all about the listing. Okay. So attend today, attend next week, and you will be a contracts pro. So let's dive in to what we're actually going to go through. We're going to go through contract information, specific addenda, the buyer representation agreement, not only how to fill it out, best practices, but also how do you deliver it in a way that makes it easier. The consent for dual agency, when and why you would use understanding whom agents represent, the contract to sale, which is the most important, inspections, super important, as well as a few other addendum and common and forms that may or may not be used depending on the house or the home that they are purchasing. Before we kind of kick into the contract itself, yes, this is being recorded. Yes, this will be sent out, will be uploaded on our YouTube channel as well. Is there anything specific you want to make sure you walk away with and get out of today? I know. All right, I'm going to take silence as a no. What I'm going to ask all of you to do is keep yourselves on mute. If you have specific questions as we're going through this, because it's going to be a lot of information in a shorter period of time. So if you have specific questions, what I'm going to ask you to do is put them in the chat box. We're going to be checking the chat box throughout to go in and answer those. And we're also going to open up at certain moments, just kind of to say, okay, let's take ourselves off mute and ask questions. So again, keep yourself on mute. Put those questions in the chat box. We will get them answered. And let's dive in. Sound good? Okay. Diving in here. Oops, all right. So we're going to kick it off with the very first thing that you need as a buyer's agent. Little disclaimer. I'm going to give you a compliance disclaimer right now. Everything that we are going to teach is best practices. It is not gospel. Okay, this is not black and white. These are best practices pulled from top producers within Maryland. You yourself, as you grow your business, will form your own best practices regarding filling your contract, verbiage you want to use, and all of that. So if you do something a little bit different, that is just fine. If you want to make sure it's allowed, that can be a great question to ask in the chat box. Again, this is not black and white. Don't copy and paste everything you see here and just start filling all your contracts out that way. These are best practices for you to potentially use. Compliance disclaimer there. All right, buyer representation agreement. Let me open this up. Take yourself off mute. I want to actually hear from you guys right now. When do we use this?
Every time you write a contract.
Every time we write a contract. For who?
For the buyer.
Okay.
And
okay.
also prior to writing a contract, so that we can obtain the person's loyalty and just create, I guess, a bond between buyer and seller, so that we are not wasting our time going out showing homes and so forth without having some sort of agreement.
Love that. So I heard the words loyalty, create a bond, and you are absolutely right. The buyer agency agreement was created to protect the buyer. Yes, there's a paragraph in here for us as agents, but in truth, this agreement was created by the Maryland Real Estate Commission to protect the buyers so the buyers can truly be represented. This agreement should, again, best practice, should be provided prior to going to see that first home or at the kitchen counter of that first home before you take a tour around that first home. Because this allows you to negotiate and truly help your buyer. Without this agreement, who can tell me who we actually represent?
You're representing the seller without this agreement.
Yep. If you don't have this agreement, technically speaking, if we want to get legal on it, if we want to get compliance on us, we cannot negotiate and represent the buyer without this agreement. So again, this agreement is, hey, Deborah, you're my buyer. I'm so excited to work with you. I'm so excited to help find you the dream home that you're looking for. This agreement protects you as a buyer and allows me to go to work for you and negotiate on your behalf. There's your verbiage, by the way. All right, so let's go down. I'm going to show you how to fill this out, best practices. Number one, the date would be whatever date you're meeting with that buyer. So for example, if I'm talking to Sharon today, and Sharon's my buyer, and we're going to go see houses on Saturday, I might send this to her today for signature electronically. So my date would be today. If I am printing this out to bring with me to that first home to have her sign in person and physically what signature sign, I'm going to put, and we're going to go see houses on Saturday, I'm going to put Saturday's date in there. The date is not when are they buying a house, the date is when am I giving you this agreement? Buyers' names. All right, question time. What buyers' names go on here? Mike, what was that?
I'd say all buyers.
Okay, what do you mean by all buyers?
There's a husband and a wife.
If there's a husband and a wife, partners, both? Absolutely. Mike is correct. It's every single buyer who's buying the house.
Ilana,
Yes.
what if the husband or wife will not be on the mortgage?
So they're the ones buying the house, but somebody else is fronting the money?
Well, only one, either the husband or the wife, is eligible for financing.
Are they going to be on the deed of the house?
Yes.
Then they need to be on this agreement. Because you're the one, or if they're the ones who are making the purchase, not meaning paying the money, but actually deciding on and choosing the house. So you are representing them in that, then they need to be on this. Yes. Great question. Great question. Yep. The other information's pretty self-explanatory. What's their address? What's their phone number? Right? What's their email addresses? By the way, you want all parties' email addresses because eventually you'll need them to sign things and they go to the different emails. The broker's name for us, Keller Williams Legacy, the broker's address, office phone number, which means the broker's office phone number. Please do not leave this place blank. I can't tell you how many agents I see leave a lot of this blank. Blanks are not good because blanks allow for questions to be asked and things to be subjective. Who are you, right? Your name, your phone number, your email address. Then when we get to number 3, buyer authorization, what this is saying is, what are they buying? Here's what you don't want to do. What you don't want to do is put a specific address in here, because then this agreement limits you to that one address. And then you need to get them to re-sign another agreement for another address if that's not the one, or if they don't win that property. Instead, a best practice is putting in words like residential, commercial, investment. It makes it very broad as to what you're actually showing them, and allows you to use the document one time and not have to rewrite it. Number 4, time frame. The effective date should in theory match the date at the very top of this agreement. If I'm gonna go show Deborah houses on Saturday, I'm gonna bring this with me to sign, then the date is gonna be this Saturday's date in both spots. It's gonna be effective starting Saturday. The continue date, this you're gonna see a lot of variations. As a coach, my personal opinion is I'm gonna do it for the whole year because buyers might change their mind, right? Do buyers ever do that? Do buyers ever like, oh, we're seeing houses and they're like, you know what? I think I want to put it off. I think I want to save more. So I personally put it out for a year. As you see, I put it for 12/30. I just kind of picked a date. What this allows you to do is be there to help them whenever they are ready and not have to redo the agreement again and get another signature. Now, if your buyer's like, why is this for a whole year? I want to buy a house next month. Why are you putting this till December? That's where you can show them the termination. Listen, I'm here to help you buy a house this month and next month. I'm putting it out for a year because you never know what life may bring. So I just want to be here to help you no matter when you're ready. And by the way, if I'm not living up to my commitment to you and providing exceptional service, hey, shoot me an email. You can fire me with, you can terminate 3 days written notice. Shoot me an email, fire me. That's what I like to tell people. So again, you do want to have something in the termination spot, whether it's can terminate with 1 day written notice, 3 day written notice, 4 days, 5 days, 7 days. That is completely up to you. 3s is kind of a best practice we're seeing out there amongst agents. As we go through this, here's one thing that's really important. You are not reading this to your buyer because legally you are not allowed. You are not attorneys. Only an attorney is allowed to actually read a contract to somebody. What we can do is provide them this and they can look it over. And if they have specific questions, they can ask us. So as agents, what we want to do with these is just become familiar. What is it actually saying? Like, what do these paragraphs mean? Right? So just reading through, again, the coming soon listings, letting them know, hey, we may see coming soons, but we can't actually go physically look at them. However, as your agent, I can talk to that listing agent and see if maybe they can make it go active sooner, right? We can submit a offer sooner. 8, broker's compensation. This is extremely important. I can't tell you, working with hundreds of agents over the past years, how many people leave this blank. What does that mean? If you leave that blank, what does that actually mean?
You might not get paid.
Mike's like, we're working for free. You might not get paid, right? In theory, if you leave this blank and there's an agent on the other end of the deal, meaning the listing agent, who is, we're just going to say, not ethical, not morally sound, yep, that they exist. They might ask to see this and they might at the table be like, oh, you know what? Nope, I'm taking everything. You're not getting anything because obviously you didn't say you wanted anything. Now, again, it's very rare that happens, but why take the chance? Again, this is a contract, meaning don't leave things blank. So what you'll see in here is an example of what some agents do. It's per the percentage listed on the MLS or 2.5% of purchase price. I've seen a few agents where they say per the MLS or 2.5% of purchase price, whichever is higher. That gives you a little playroom as far as if you go to take someone to see a house, they want to buy that house and the percentage in MLS is 2%. then the buyer would make up the difference because you said 2.5% or whichever is higher. If you do that verbiage, just make sure you explain that to the buyer up front, so they know they might have to upfront some money to you, or they might have to pay you money. Again, that's totally up to you. I've also seen some agents where they say per the percentage on MLS or 2.5% of purchase price plus $395 admin fee. Right? Some agents do charge their buyers admin fees. That is an agent decision. Keller Williams Legacy does not require that in any way. That is completely up to you. So again, there's a lot of different ways that you can put in the compensation there, but the compensation is whatever your side is potentially going to be. Now this paragraph right here, the number 1, right? During the terms of this agreement, if during the period of 90 days following the expiration or termination of this agreement, buyer executes a lease or written agreement to purchase. What this paragraph is saying, I'm not gonna read the whole paragraph because all you can read it. What this paragraph is actually saying is, let's say you're working with a buyer. Okay. I'm working with Mike, he's my buyer. And we go out, he signs his agreement. We go out and we start looking at houses. And we go this Saturday and we go view 3 properties. And then let's say he sends me an email on Sunday and he goes, nope, I don't need you anymore. And he sends me I'm terminating this agreement email. And then all of a sudden I notice on Facebook a week after, or I hear through the grapevine, or I hear through a listing agent that one of the 3 properties that I took him to, he went directly to that listing agent within that 90-day period, so maybe that week after, and purchased the property. He went under contract with a listing agent to try to save some money, to try to get a deal. That this paragraph protects us as agents. So what that means is that's where Mike can get the, that's where I, as Mike's agent, could get the broker, our broker, Keller Williams Legacy, involved with the broker of that property that he purchased on the phone to determine how compensation can work out. Doesn't mean that you're getting the full, let's say 2.5%, but it does mean that there will be some restitution for that occurring based on the signed agreement, based on you putting a number in that blank. Again, if you leave that blank, and he goes and fires you and buys a property the very next day, well, nothing you can do about that because you left this blank. So again, 90 is kind of a theme we see out there. You'll see people say 120, 180. I like 90, it's a nice number. I'm not tracking things for 180 days. That's a long time, personally. Again, this is the one paragraph that protects us. In the event of a lease, if you're working with a buyer who's pre-approved and you absolutely know they are not going to rent something, you can just put NA here. If you are working with a renter, by the way, this is a buyer/tenant agency agreement. So if you're working with someone looking to rent, then you absolutely want to fill this out because this is your place of how you would get paid. An example, which I do want to put in for the following class, remind me about that, would be maybe per the MLS or 50% of first month's rent. Again, that's kind of a common thing that agents working with renters put in there. Again, if you don't put anything and you are working the renter, in theory, you might not get paid.
So would this only apply to a person that you're working with and a house that you've shown them?
So this is a great question. So this agreement applies to any buyer or renter that you are now going to work with, that you want to work with, right? It isn't per house, it's actually per person. Right, so if you go out today and you find someone who's like, oh my God, yeah, my sister and I want to go rent a property together. We want to find a house to rent. Great, let me find out what you're looking for and let me send you over an agreement so I can represent you. Where it's you all of a sudden talk to your cousin and your cousin's like, oh my God, I want to buy a house. Right, great. Let me go ahead, find out what you're looking for. And I'm going to send you over the agreement. By the way, I call it an agreement because it's a softer term, right, than contract. I'm going to go ahead and sign over the agreement so I can represent you, so I can negotiate and work on your behalf. So this is for every buyer, every renter we ever work with. Did that answer your question? That was a great question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I'll put the next one in the chat.
Oh, that was a great question. Thank you. So again, you want to get really familiar with the paragraphs, but once again, you are not reading this to a person. This just tells the buyer things that we as agents help them with, right? We're representing them, we're protecting them, we're going to go negotiate on their behalf, right? Intercompany. Hey, we might find a house that I might find Mike, my buyer, a house today that's listed by Melissa, the agent, who's in the same brokerage, right? So this paragraph's just saying that I might be finding you a house that's represented by an agent who's just in the same brokerage as I am, right? You know, this flood disclosure just talks about them doing their due diligence on making sure the home they purchase is or is not in a flood zone, right? Down to the bottom here, right, the addenda, we're going to go through what these mean: consent for dual agency, disclosure of licensee status. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. And then, all right, we talked about the very top. Let's talk about it again real quick. Who signs it? Who signs this buyer/tenant agency agreement?
The buyer and the broker can sign it, but also the agent can sign it as an authorized representative.
So yes, you are actually going to sign it as their buyer agent. You do not need the broker's signature on this. So no need to send it to me and be like, oh my God, I need the broker to sign. You are the authorized representative. If you are a licensed agent and part of a board of realtors, which for us would be Greater Baltimore Board of Realtors. So as long as you're part of a board of realtors in the state of Maryland and a licensed active agent, you are considered the authorized representative and would be the one signing this. For the buyers, it's all of the buyers. Yep, everybody going on the deed, everybody you are working with. Yep, absolutely. Any questions on this before we move on to the next document? Well, that was fun. All right, so Rachel is going to come up and talk about the next one.
Let me make sure you can hear. All right, so this next one, understanding whom real estate agents represent. I'm going to ask the question, when do we use this? Anybody know when we might use this document?
First time buyers.
First time buyers, okay. Any other suggestions?
If you don't have the exclusive agreement signed,
Yeah.
you can have this one signed.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this document goes through and explains who agents represent, right? So the seller's agent, a sub-agent, agents who represent the buyer. But yes, absolutely, what you just said, if you are working with someone who wants to buy a home and they don't want to sign that agreement that Alana just went through, you'd want to make sure that they have this so they know that you in fact don't represent them and that you are essentially a sub-agent, you know, and representing the seller. Absolutely. Or if you're the seller's agent and someone comes to you and says, hey, I see you're selling this home for someone. I don't have an agent, but this is a document that you would want to make sure you get in front of them. Now, there's a lot of explanation on here. Now you want them to sign this saying that they understood. Legally, they don't have to, but you're going to want to sign it and make sure you like make note of the fact that they chose not to sign it, but that you presented it to them. You have something to add, I can tell.
I know.
You stood up. I was like, there's
So
something else
much.
she wants to make sure.
We have a lot of agents who work with investors. So if you come across a buyer who is, and by the way, an investor is a buyer. If you come across a buyer who is not wanting to commit to you as their sole agent, and they just want you to show them like an investment property or this like one-off house, this document represents you on that one house. So if you work with a lot of investors, you may have an investor say, well, no, I'm not just using one agent. I'm spreading myself out to a bunch of agents. I'm not signing a buyer agency agreement. Okay, cool. So each time you show them a house, or each time you would have them sign this. So when you show them a house, you are representing them for that one house. So great for investors.
And this also, I also failed to mention that this also talks about dual agency as well on here. For additional info. Any other questions about that? That's a pretty short one compared to the last one. I'll go through another one.
We'll get some long ones.
All right, so for perfect segue, right? Consent for dual agency. This is something that you're going to have, if you're working with a buyer or a seller, have someone sign with you, you know, in case if you're working with a seller, you end up having a buyer come through and putting in an offer that is, you know, has an agent from your same brokerage, or if you're working with that buyer, like Alana mentioned before. This is not saying you will definitely, or this person will definitely be buying or selling with someone who's using an agent from the same brokerage, but it's that first step to say this could happen. The client that you're working with actually has two chances to like sign, or I should say like decide not to go with dual agency, right? So just because they're signing it this first time doesn't mean they're definitely going to be looking at purchasing or selling a property with the dual agent situation. Basically, they have the chance to kind of say, yes, I'm okay with this now. Or they can say no, of course. But then once, like if they do actually go to enter into a contract with someone where a dual agency situation pops up, they will ask again to affirm that decision. So if they decide from the beginning that like, yes, I'm willing to do this, and then they change their mind, then, you know, they wouldn't be looking at that property anymore, but they do have like kind of two chances to decide not to do that if they want. Obviously, if you're working with a client and they don't want to sign this, what you're going to want to do is just kind of explain the implications. Like obviously their choice, not saying that you should try to change their mind or anything, but letting them know that that means you won't be able to show them any homes that are listed by your brokerage. Just so they're kind of aware of that. Sure, I think I see some things in the chat. What was the name of the last contract that you will use for investor? Okay. The one that Alana was saying you could use with an investor was I'm forgetting the name of it now. The explanation of understanding whom real estate agents represent was the one that you could use with an investor if they don't want to sign an exclusive agreement with you.
Hey, Rachel.
Yes.
It's David.
Hi, David.
I just want to point out to everybody that the whole idea of the buyer agreement is that you want to represent the buyers. The understanding whom agents represent form is used for only unrepresented consumers. So that's the way that I teach it. I think that makes, you guys are doing great, and I love what you're saying. But for clarification, it's anytime you have an unrepresented consumer, whether it's an investor, whether it's a buyer that won't sign, whether
Right.
you have a listing and that buyer doesn't have a buyer agent and you then represent the seller. You
Right.
only give the understanding whom agents represent form to unrepresented consumers.
Right. Okay, cool, thanks. All right. Consumer notice to buyers of residential real estate in Maryland. You would include this with the exclusive buyer tenant representation agreement. This, correct me if I'm wrong, Alana, or David, for that matter. These are some additional things that you want buyers to be aware of when they're looking at buying property. And so this is just kind of to confirm, they sign it to confirm that they know all these things and can do their due diligence.
Again, to 100%. And again, you're not reading this to somebody. You're
Right.
literally just sending it to them as, hey, here's some things for you to be aware of, which is why it's called consumer notice. We're providing notice of what to be aware of throughout the buying process. Yep, absolutely. It's a very short, easy one that you just provide, they sign it, and there's no real explanation of it needed.
Yeah. Like the wire fraud through email, you'll see this here. I know when I bought my house like 2 years ago, I think I got like 10 messages from the title company, from my lender, from my agent, like all making sure that that's definitely a big one that they'll hear many times, but I think that's probably an important one that it's
Yeah.
good to hear a lot of times, just to make sure it sinks in. All right. Taking it over? Oh, I'll jump in.
Okay, I'll jump in. We'll tag team.
Yeah.
We'll tag team. All right. All right. Contract to sale. This is, by the way, I just want to make sure if I'm wearing, can you guys, I'm trying to enunciate. Can you guys understand me okay?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So if at any point you can't, please interrupt and stop me and let me know. The contract to sale is your purchase contract. It's saying to that listing agent, here's what our offer is. So to go down through, now again, I'm not going to read to you all the pages of the contract to sale, but I am going to point out some best practices within it. Okay. The date of the offer, please don't leave that blank. That is you're going to date that, whatever date you're sending it to your buyer for signature. So for example, I might go take Mike out to see houses today. He chooses one. I then gather all my documents in DocuSign, date them today's date, right, which would be the 6th. So the date would be January 6th. I'd send them over to him today. Now let's say it's tonight. I'd send them to him tonight. He signs them tonight. I might not get them to the listing agent till tomorrow morning. You're still having the date be the date you're sending them to your buyer for signature. You're not going to come back and rechange the date. The seller, you should know if you're writing a contract to sale, you should know the seller's name because you're going to have to get from that listing agent certain forms. The listing agent's going to provide you with, or they're uploaded on Bright MLS if the listing agent did it properly. The certain forms called inclusions, exclusions, disclaimer, disclosure. There may be some other addendums in there. All of those forms have the seller's name in it. Here's a best practice. We're submitting a 25, 30 plus page document to somebody to sign for the biggest purchase of their life. Highly recommend, this is where we slow down a minute or we pay someone to do it for us. If you need recommendations, I have them. And we enter in every blank. So I would personally put in the seller's information, the buyer's information, right? Don't leave them blank. Property, that's easy. That's the house they're buying. What's the property's address? Number 5, estate. Is it in fee simple or is there ground rent? Now, here's the thing. In theory, Bright MLS and the listing for it should say, because the listing agent should have put that on there. I will just tell you that unfortunately, that's not always the case. So I definitely recommend on our end being responsible agents as we all are. I highly recommend going to, oh my goodness, MD Land Rec, right? Okay, thank you. You always remember that one more than I do. So, and we'll put this in the chat box, mdlandrec.com. Where's .gov? Oh, we're gonna get that in the chat box for you. .net. We're putting it in the chat box, mdlandrec.net. When you look up a property's address, it will show you the deed, show you the names in the deed, and it's also gonna show you in the deed, is there ground rent or not? It will physically use the words fee simple or ground rent. Be very careful not to just assume, especially if you're doing something in Baltimore City. Baltimore City and PG County are the two highest locations for ground rent. So don't assume it's one or the other without officially checking, where you could be setting your buyer up for additional payments they didn't know about. Okay. All right, purchase price. The price that your buyer wants to submit. We'll talk about different adjustments to this as we get later on in these forums, but this is what does your buyer want to make as their best offer. Payment terms. This right here is earnest money deposit, which means good faith fund. Earnest money deposit is a good faith deposit that is held by either the brokerage or title. Highly recommend brokerage, Keller Williams Legacy, because there's a lot of extra protection from Maryland Commission when held by a brokerage over a title company. National averages, earnest money deposits are on average about 1% of purchase price, but they can be more. It's actually, in theory, up to the buyer. We just advise the buyer to typically not go less than 1%. Okay. So again, how are they depositing? By way of check, $3,000, who's holding it? Okay. Again, very important. I'm going to be a broken record. Do not leave it blank. If the only thing you take away from this class is to not leave blanks, that is the greatest thing to take away. Settlement. I want to point out some verbiage here because it's really important. It says date of settlement, February 15th or sooner if agreed upon in writing. So what this means is in real estate, you're going to have things push out. You're going to have settlement dates that you might have a date in here of February 2nd, but in the financing need to take place a little more and it got pushed to February 10th. That is a very normal thing in real estate, is having settlement dates move. It's easier to have a little bit longer out of a settlement date than it is to put it sooner and have to redo a document to change dates. Again, it's February 15th or sooner, as opposed to February 15th or later. Number 9, you're checking off how are they paying, right? If you're making an offer for this person, you have already talked to their lender. You've already seen their pre-approval letter, and you know how they're being financed. Is it conventional, VA, FHA? Are they investor doing hard money lending? Are they doing cash? Right? Are they selling a property and paying by cash? Right? Which, by the way, you would want to write that in here as well. So it's really important to check off how are they paying. Number 10, this paragraph confuses almost every agent. So I'll kind of break this down. The first part of this paragraph, actually, I do like seeing that, talks about the buyer agrees to make written application for financing within these number of days. That just means that within, I put 3 here, best practice, within 3 days, this buyer agrees to officially choose a lender to write the application. They have talked to a lender prior to this and they've gotten pre-approved, but that does not mean they can't change it right now. They can absolutely, if they're like, oh my God, you know what? My friend just advised me that this lender is giving better rates. I want to switch it. They're under contract and they have 3 days to be able to do that. The second part is the official financing commitment. That means that they made application, they submitted their W-2s, they did everything they needed to do. It is, we are financially ready to go, meaning to purchase the house. On average, it takes a lender about 25 to 30 days for those things to happen. I usually like to do 30 just to be on the safe side. If you're talking to a buyer and they have multiple ways they're paying for a home. So let's say they're doing lender financing, a gift from a grandparent, and cash from a settlement at their house. Okay. This financing commitment, in talking to the lender, the conversation you want to find out is 30 realistic? Will they have everything together in 30 days? Maybe it might need to be 45 days sometimes. So again, the conversation with a lender is the most important thing in this category. The rest of these paragraphs, you'll see under some of the paragraphs, like for example, right here, number 12, it says inspection addenda attached or inspection declined. You want your buyers to sign one or the other. So obviously asking the buyer like, hey, do you want an inspection on this house? Yes. Then they're going to assign inspection addenda attached. If they're like, nope, I don't need inspection, I just want to buy it, I don't want anything to get in the way, then obviously they would initial decline it. Okay.
What I think is helpful, and
Yeah.
when you're in DocuSign and you're setting this up, it will have, like if you do the pre-tag roles, it'll do initials for both spots. If you know that you've already talked to them, they say they want an inspection, those, you can remove the one from declining it. And then what you want to do is you want to make sure where they say that the inspection addenda is attached, then I would make that required. So that way they don't skip over it. You don't have to go back and have them fill it out again. Again, that's if you've talked to them and you know they definitely want an inspection, because they have to make that decision, not you. But I think it's helpful so that way you don't have to worry about them missing that or signing the wrong one or signing both of them, or like initialing both of them when really they only need to initial one.
Good point. Number 13. Oh my goodness. So this is the part I'd like to share a little story. Inclusions, exclusions. You're going to be getting this form from the listing agent or from the listing attached on Bright MLS. And it's going to show what's the seller leaving in the house. Are they leaving the fridge? Are they leaving the alarm system? Are they leaving the curtains? What's happening, right? What are they taking? It's very important to pay attention to that form to check off the right things. So here's the story. There's an agent that I worked with for many years. He would rush through these so fast that he would just take previous things and, oh, okay, yep, fridge, stove, washer, dryer. He would check off everything that he thought was being left in the house without actually spending a minute to cross-check for that one particular house. So he was working with a buyer. He checked off refrigerator on this, not noticing that on the inclusions exclusions form that the listing agent provided, it said removing refrigerator, replacing with lower quality. Because they had some top of the line, crazy expensive, fancy schmancy fridge that the buyer, the owners were taking with them, but they were going to put a run-of-the-mill fridge in this place. Well, because this agent checked off leaving fridge, but did not specify anything else, his buyers thought they're leaving the fridge. So when they ended up doing the final walkthrough before settlement and they noticed it was a totally different fridge that didn't have all the fanciness to it, who did the buyers look at when they saw that happen?
Their buyer, their agent.
Their agent. They looked to the agent and said, that's not the fridge that I thought I was buying a house with. So what do you think this agent did, the buyer agent did after settlement?
He probably had to credit them or buy them a refrigerator.
He went and brought them to Home Depot and bought them a refrigerator with his commission check. Okay.
Yeah.
Be very, very careful of what you check off because, again, we can be held liable for these. We're their agent, we're the experts. That was a true story. Went out, but it was his second buyer ever as being an agent that he worked with. So I guarantee you, he spot checks everything now. He is 4 years in, he has never made a mistake since. Knock on plastic. As you see at the bottom of each page, you'll see buyer signatures. Your buyer does need to, initials. Your buyer needs to initial the bottom of every single page. What they're initialing is that they've read it. That's it. They're just initialing that, yep, saw the page, I read it. Same thing here with 16, lead-based paint. All right, real estate question. What year does a house need to be built by to not include the lead-based paint disclosures?
Prior to 1978.
So
79.
reverse what you just said. So prior to 1978, they include all lead-based paint disclosures.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
After, yep, I knew exactly where you were going, Deborah. Yep.
1978 or later.
Yep, absolutely. Now, when they initial this, they're not initialing that there's lead-based paint. It might be a house that was built yesterday. They're initialing that they read the paragraph. Okay, so they still are initialing these paragraphs, just simply saying, I read it. I understand it. Now, whether they actually read it or not, that's on them. Right? So you'll see here a lot of these buyer initials. And again, it's initialing, they've read the paragraph. Okay. $18. Think of this as your checklist. This is an amazing agent checklist. This is where you're checking off like, okay, are they purchasing it as is? Or are they doing an inspection form? Is it a condo? Are you a relative of the person buying? So you need to disclose your licensee status, right? Was it built before 1978? And there's lead paint disclosures. So you're checking off everything that's going to be included in the packet that your buyer is going to be signing. By the way, as a new agent or an agent that maybe hasn't written too many buyer contracts, this is a fantastic, this isn't everything, but this is a great, helpful checklist for you as well. And then there may be additional things. There are no two deals the same. You can work with 25 buyers and 25 sellers, and I guarantee you, every one of them will have something a little bit special and different to them. One buyer, you might have a contract that totals 27 pages, while another buyer, you might have a contract that's 42 pages. So there may be other special conditions depending on the type of house they're buying, what's needed, where it is, the county, etc. Again, as you see, we're only on page 4 of 11. I am not going to stand here and read every paragraph to you because I'm not an attorney and I'm not allowed. And because all of you are super, super, super intelligent and can go off and read it. And I highly recommend it. I will tell you this though. One of the greatest practices that I've seen a lot of agents do is they take this 11-page contract to sale and they print it out and they sit down with a highlighter and a pen and they read through it with a highlighter or pen. And each paragraph, they put a little note next to each paragraph. Okay, what does this mean? Like, what am I reading? They put like a little sentence or bullet point next to each one, just for their, not sending to anybody. This is just for your own learning. And it's them taking a note of, okay, what did I just read? What does that say? Right? And then the highlighting spots is reading through things. And as you read it, you may come to a paragraph where you're like, I have read this 5 times and this legal jargon, I have no idea what this is talking about. Those are great things to highlight and then go to a coach, come to us, fellow agent you work with who's been in the business and who's done over 25 deals. That's my recommendation. People who've done 3 deals, fantastic. And I don't recommend asking that person to read and decipher a contract because they're probably still learning it with you, right? We're here as coaches, come to us. I can't tell you how many times I've read it. Way too many. So again, going through each paragraph, initialing the bottom of each page saying, yes, I've read this page. Okay. Scrolling down, I'm actually specifically going to a certain paragraph. Did I pass it? I am looking for a specific paragraph. Hold on. Oh, I did. Pardon me as I scroll towards the top. I'm going. I am looking for, I am back at the top. I am looking for something that, by the way, every contract gets, let me rephrase this. Many contracts get updated October 1st from Maryland Real Estate Commission. We as a brokerage, the broker gets that information from Maryland Commission on what contracts have been updated. We get that information October 1st every year. And then we update the forms in our document system that we provide you with. So then you have the most up-to-date forms. If you as an agent save certain forms to reuse them, please make sure, I cannot stress this enough, make sure October 1st, you find out from your broker, from your coach, from the data, from the document system, you find out what forms have been updated to be able to throw out your old ones and import the new ones, or you're going to be using outdated, not compliant contracts. Okay. So we taught this class a little ways back using some forms that were prior to October 1st. I recently updated this for this class and I'm realizing that this document was updated. So what I'm looking for actually doesn't exist anymore in this contract. I'm so used to teaching this class on a previous contract that the paragraph I'm looking for is not even in this anymore, which is great because it was the most confusing paragraph ever. So I am going to scroll all the way down. All right. Once again, who's signing this? Sharon?
Whoever's on the deed.
Whoever's going on the deed. Yep. Woo. Whoever's going on the deed. Now, I want to point out here, date of contract acceptance. That line is going to be blank to begin with because you're filling this out to send to your buyers for signature. Then you're going to take the entire packet of all the documents, not just this 11 page, but the whole 30+ page contract. send it to the listing agent, preferably as a PDF in an email. Send it to the listing agent. Once that seller hopefully accepts it, that's the date of acceptance. So when that listing agent sends it back and the seller has signed everything, you as the buyer agent want to look to make sure that that date is written here. If the date is not there because the listing agent forgot to put it on there, which happens a lot, you put the date on there. Without that date, technically, you don't have a contract. It could, in theory, be squashed by either party if the date is not in there. So please make sure the date is right here where it says date of contract acceptance after all parties sign everything. And then finally, at the last page, you see a lot of blanks here, right? Who are your buyers? Who's the sellers? You actually, as the buyer agent, have all this information because you have what the listing agent has said you. So fill it all in. Again, it may take you an extra 5 minutes, but that 5 minutes, here's the thing, if you are the listing agent, okay, let's say all of you are the listing agent right now, and you get 5 offers sent to you, and all 5 are the exact same price, exact same offer, exact same everything. One of the things, now, this should not happen, but I'm going to say it does. One of the things that, honestly, that listing agent may look at, again, they have to show everything gets presented to the seller and the seller chooses. But one of the things that listing agent may look at is, do they have to go in here and fill in all these blanks because you didn't? Right? When Rachel submitted hers and she didn't miss it, everything was filled in. She even looked up that listing agent's license number on DLLR to put that in there. So this listing agent has no extra work to do on their end. All they're doing is submitting it to the buyer, or sorry, the seller, right? Take a few extra minutes and fill in all the blanks. I think I've said that a lot, fill in the blanks. I feel like I need tick marks for every time I say it.
Be a drinking game.
It could be a drinking game.
Don't drink, listen to us, but watch it later and maybe drink.
That could be a really fun drinking game. I'm just saying, iced tea, lemonade,
Yeah, totally.
Water. All right, let me check the chat box for some questions. Number 15, can you explain, please? There are a number of homes in Howard County that are agricultural. Yep, great question. Let's go up to that, number 15. Scrolling. So you'll see here, I put in the blank seller if applicable. This is a negotiation point. When submitting these, a best practice that many buyer agents do is put in seller if applicable. That way, if it is in a agriculturally assessed property, right? Meaning it's a farm, it's, again, agricultural land. What they're asking for, because there's different tax assessments, is that those extra tax assessments will be paid by the seller. Now, here's the thing. You might submit this with that verbiage, and then the listing agent comes back and says, okay, we will, my seller will agree to this if they raise the purchase price by $5,000 and split the taxes 50-50. Now it's in the buyer's court to say, yes, we'll do that, or no, we're walking away, right? Let me look at the chat box real quick. Oh, number 14. Yes, same here, same thing here. The tax assessed as a result of this transfer shall be paid by seller if applicable. So when you have agricultural land, for some of you on here who've never dealt with that, there are different taxes that are imposed. Do not ask me what those are. I am not an agricultural tax assessor. However, the lender or the title company, not lender, the title company will be able to tell you what all those taxes are. So if you're looking for like, okay, we have my buyer's looking for this farmland. I know this is considered, the listing says agricultural land, right? Or agriculturally assessed. The title company, this technically the listing agent should also share what those taxes are. But if they don't, you can call the title company, give them the address, and the title company can provide that as well. Having a relationship with title companies is fantastic. Not only that, as a buyer's agent, you'll need a title company because they're the ones who take you to the settlement table. Let me look at the chat box real quick. Oh, the taxes are usually lower, residential is higher. Awesome, thank you. You addressed the first time homeowners box in page 10. Yep, page 10, what am I on here? 2, let's go down. So great questions, by the way. All right, so right here, first time home buyer. If your buyer qualifies, which by the way, when you're talking to a buyer, some questions you're going to ask the buyer is, have you ever bought a house before in Maryland? That's a key question, in Maryland, right? If they say no, they could be a first-time home buyer. However, I will tell you that we also need to check with the lender to just double check, because they might say no, but yet all of a sudden the lender uncovers through their due diligence that they helped in the payment and purchase of something else for their son to buy a house. So now in theory, maybe they're now not qualified as a first-time home buyer. So number one, a great question to ask somebody, just as a starter question, just, hey, I'm so excited you're looking to buy a house. You know, will this be, do you currently rent or own? Great, you rent. Is this your first time? Have you ever bought a house before? No, you haven't. Okay, awesome. And then when you get them connected with the lender, you yourself should be talking to the lender to find out if they qualify for first-time home buyer. Right?
I think the other thing to think of too is sometimes they can be, I don't know if this is for Maryland or if this is the FHA like first time, that sometimes like they might have bought a home, but they bought their home and sold it 5 years ago and haven't owned since, then I know sometimes they can qualify. But that would be, again, a question for the lender to help you work out. I don't remember if that's for Maryland or FHA or both.
Yeah, so Rachel brings up a really good point. There are certain stipulations regarding purchases and loans they've had and types of loans and whose name was on it and et cetera, that may or may not qualify them for first-time home buying. We don't ever want to say to a buyer, hey, you're going to qualify for first-time home buyer. Because until they talk to a lender, we can't say that for guarantee because we don't have the power to look things up. Right? And to be honest with you, unfortunately, I don't trust what most people tell me. I've been burned way too many times and seen way too many agents get burned. So instead saying, oh my God, you may qualify as a first-time home buyer, as we talk to the lender, we're going to find out. And then go through that. Oh, go ahead, Deborah.
So for tax purposes, from the seller's standpoint, who has responsibility and liability for determining whether this person is a first-time home buyer or not? Are there certain tax implications that the seller would be responsible for if the answer is yes or no? And if you find out later in the process that the person in fact is or is not a first-time home buyer, what are the implications to us as?
Yeah,
real estate?
great question. So on the tax side of thing, the recorded recordation of taxes, thank you, Rachel. You always have the right terms. So the recordation of taxes, typically, now I'm going to say keywords here because I am not going to say if this, then this, if this, then this, because there's so many stipulations. Typically, if the lender qualifies them and says, yes, they are a first-time home buyer, then when submitting this we'll know this before we're even submitting the contract to the listing agent. We would check this box off, and then typically the seller pays those recordation, those taxes, right? To record the deed, right? Exactly. Now, if they, prior to settlement, or even the day before settlement, the lender, whoever catches, like, oh my God, oops, we missed this. Number one, I'd probably find out why they missed it in the beginning, just for learning's sake, for future reference, because, so we can avoid it for the future. But now it's a conversation, right? Now we need to disclose that. Now it's a conversation with that listing agent, because if they no longer qualify for first-time home buyer, then typically it's a 50-50. Right? Again, I use the word typically because these are also negotiation points. So we could call a listing agent and say, hey, listen, I just found out, this is, again, communication is so key. I'm going to call the listing agent, Rachel, and say, hey, I know we're going to settlement like Monday. I literally just found out from my buyer's lender that they actually, because of certain things, do not qualify anymore as first-time home buyer. I did want to bring that to your attention. They're still requesting everything move forward and the seller pay for blah, blah, blah taxes. Now, here's the thing, they might come back and be like, nope, we're, all right, they'll pay 50 and your buyers will pay 50. Then you go back to the buyers and we're kind of back to negotiation time frame. I always say, is the buyer really willing to walk away from their dream home based on just some taxes, right? And I usually ask that buyer that question in that way, right? Now, you did say the word liable, so I did want to answer that because I know you asked that in a previous class. That's a really good word. Unfortunately, it's hard to answer because it's a legal term. And I'm not an attorney, so I don't want to give you any wrong information. If it comes to a point where there's blame being placed and something's about to fall apart and people want to hire attorneys and all of that because they're like, oh my God, you know what? You did me wrong. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. That's where we want to get our broker involved. And that's where we want to get the, figure out, okay, number one, can we salvage it so the buyers and sellers go to settlement, close it, and everybody's happy and they get to move into their dream house and have their beautiful kitchen, right? Or is it not salvageable? The buyers are completely irate, the sellers are completely irate, nobody's willing to pay anything, and the deal's just falling apart, right? Or does it fall somewhere in the middle? So that word liable is a really difficult word to answer because, again, that's more of an attorney type word when it goes to if it ends up going to court, right? I have seen buyers sue sellers. I've seen sellers sue buyers.
What about lenders? Can we at any time hold the lender responsible or lie? Is the lender ever liable?
I mean, here's the thing. If somebody drops the ball on something, I absolutely hold them responsible. What that means in terms of restitution, I cannot answer that question because it's a conversation with that lender or that lender's boss, right? The head of the company, maybe. I will tell you that I used to use multiple lenders back in the day. I have gone through my fair share of lenders in the past years. I have seen many who can make or break a deal. I've seen many where deals literally fell apart at the settlement table because the lender or title, one of them dropped the ball, right? Number one, on my end, personally as an agent, I'm like, I'm never using you again, moving on to the next. That is why, you know, here at Keller Williams Legacy, I'm always connecting with some of the preferred lenders that have been vetted. And, you know, I always also come from curiosity. I would talk to the lender and say, hey, you know, what happened? What could have prevented this from happening? So I know. And just kind of understanding it more. And then if you, again, looking for any type of restitution, or if your buyer is, that's a conversation with that company to find out what can actually be done.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
No, that was a very good question.
Can I interject?
Absolutely.
Okay, so for those of you that don't know me, my name is David Politzer and I am the broker. So when we talk about liability and mistakes, first of all, typically the buyer and the seller are the parties to the transaction. So as buyer agents and listing agents, we are not party to the transaction. So if someone says we did something wrong, according to the Maryland Real Estate Brokers Act, there has to be a gross misrepresentation, fraud, you know, embezzlement, forgery, anything that would be considered an act, almost a criminal act. So simply by misrepresenting something that they were a first-time home buyer and come to find out either through the lender or the title company that they're not, as real estate licensees, we are not necessarily responsible unless we knew something and didn't disclose it. So if we ask the buyer, have you ever bought a home before in Maryland? And they say no, and then you come to find out that they co-signed for their brother 3 years ago. Well, how would we know that unless we're told? As far as what you were talking about, the lender is not a party to the transaction either, but the lender is held to a bit of a standard of, you know, asking due diligence questions as well. So it, as far as we're concerned, which, you know, ultimately we want our buyers to buy and their sellers to sell. But I think that from a liability standpoint, we don't do anything wrong, although we are responsible for anything we knew or should have known. Okay, so for example, if you sold this buyer a house, you know, 5 years ago, and the lender says you're a first-time home buyer and they say no, and you didn't know that they answered no, and you come to find out that they were wrong, then we may have been a problem. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So it always, as Alana said, it always depends on the situation. But typically, we as licensees are not held liable for things that we don't know about or as not parties to the transaction. Does that help you?
yes, it does. So we should not feel responsible for paying the difference in the taxes out of our commission. Or we may
Well-
choose to do so if we want to save the,
Sure.
Yeah.
So the taxes, so somebody asked about their taxes, and real quick, I'll tell you that the way that Maryland first-time buyer home tax works is that if you're a first-time home buyer, the state portion of the buyer's portion is waived. So the buyer doesn't pay their state portion, the seller still does. The local portion is split between the buyer and the seller. Now, they can be negotiated, but the waive part is the state portion of the Maryland transfer tax.
Yeah.
But the seller still pays their side. The buyer just doesn't pay their side. It's just not charged if they're a first-time home buyer. Does that help?
okay, so yes,
So if they find out that they are a first-time home buyer, I mean, not a first-time home buyer, and there's, you know, an $1,800 charge because it's an expensive tax, and the buyer says, I don't have the money, and the seller says, well, I'm not paying it, that's where you may have to negotiate in some way, shape, or form.
right,
Does that help?
that helps, yes.
Thank you so much, David.
Sure, okay.
All right, we're gonna move on. Rachel, take it away.
So in this market, you've probably heard, or you've probably experienced, a lot of you, that there are a lot of offers going in on one house, right? It's very competitive. This shouldn't be a surprise to anybody on here. So this can be one of those tools that can help you and ultimately your buyer client potentially be one of the more competitive offers. So the purchase price escalation addendum is an addendum that you can include when you're submitting an offer that basically says, like we had, I think with the contract, so we said that the offer was 300,000, but you can say that you're willing to beat any other offer that comes in by $1,000 up until that 315,000. So if your client's offer is 300,000, but someone comes in at 305,000, what this says is that your client is willing to pay 306,000, right? Because they're willing to go 1,000 over up to that 315. There's, of course, more information here within, they have to prove that they have that offer. So they can't just come back and be like, oh yeah, we had someone say 314, so it's now 315, right? But this is a way to potentially make your offer more competitive. Now, if somebody comes in at 320, this of course isn't going to be helpful, but as helpful anyway. But this is a way, if your buyer is willing to potentially put more and there are multiple offers, to not completely discount yours if yours is underneath some of the other offers. And of course, there's the counter offer by the seller and acceptance. All right, we talked earlier, property inspections addendum. If you know that your client wants an inspection, you're going to be filling this out. So this will talk about the different types of inspections. They may choose to do all of them. They may choose to do one. They may do 2 or 3. The most common one is going to be the structural and mechanical. And they're going to be initialing this. The other thing you're going to be filling in is how many days from that date of contract acceptance do they have to get this inspection. Now, you want to make sure that you're giving enough time to your client to get this done. Because if you put 5 days, calling someone to do an inspection, getting it scheduled, getting them to come out, and then getting the report back in 5 days, unless they are very closely connected to an inspector, like probably not going to happen that quickly. So definitely you can pick what that date is. I think best practices, like we've talked about, is probably 2 weeks, or that 14 days from contract acceptance. They can choose to potentially do mold if they want to, environmental, radon, often one that they check with basements, chimney inspection if they have a chimney that they want to get checked out, lead-based paint hazard inspection.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I was told that in this market, 14 days is too long. I've actually lost out on an offer because I had 14 days. And they were looking for something like 5, maybe 7 days.
Yeah, you will see right now, I will tell you, this market's kind of interesting because the national best practice is somewhere between 10 and 14. Because like Rachel said, you have to schedule them, they have to go out, they have to do it. It takes 24 hours to get the report back. You have to review it with the buyer, you have to submit it all within that time frame. Right now, because of the listings going really fast and multiple offer scenarios, we are seeing a lot more, honestly, we're seeing, number one, a lot more people going into buying houses without inspections. That's a choice of your buyer. We do not make that decision for them. If you put on there, like Rachel said, if you put on there 5 days, here's what that really means. Because unfortunately, you can put 5, you can tell your buyer, okay, to win this, I need to put 5 days on here, but is that realistic with the inspector? Because we're dealing with an outside person. That means that if the offer is accepted today, day 1 starts tomorrow. Meaning the inspector would have to go out by tomorrow, get the report back to you by Saturday, because it's not business days, this is days. get the report back to you by Saturday to review with your buyer Saturday to get the anything that the buyer wants done. Hopefully they don't want anything done, but if they do, over to the listing agent by Sunday. So that's what I mean, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So that's 3 days, right? So
Yeah, if it is, I mean, if in this market, that's what you're hearing it a lot, I would say that that's a choice that you and the buyer, well,
Yeah.
choice the buyer could make. What I would say is if that's something you want to do, maybe call a couple inspection companies and see, hey, if I put this offer in and say 5 days, will you be able to come out and do this in 5 days? Just so you know, then maybe what company you might want to use and if that's acceptable, and make sure that the buyer is okay with, if they can't get an inspection, are they okay with potentially missing out on that opportunity?
Yeah, what happens is if the time frame, which by the way, I am seeing 10 right now. 10 is kind of a number we're seeing a lot of in this industry today. The most important thing is, number one, making sure your buyer really knows what it means. And that, I like what Rachel said, being proactive with the inspector ahead of time. So you know their turnaround, you have someone lined up. Hey, we are actively looking. How fast, if they find a house today, how fast can you be out there? And having that conversation with the with the inspector ahead of time, I think that is brilliant. The other thing is making sure the buyer is aware that if that's what's going to make or break the deal, maybe they want, and the inspection is very important to them, maybe they want to up their purchase price or add in an escalation clause to up the ante a bit, make them shine a little more in that way. As long as the buyer knows that if you put 5 days on this and then inspector, you know, it goes under contract today and the inspector does not go out till Monday, that buyer has lost their rights to ask for anything. They are now in an as-is mode and they're moving forward with this as is, and they can't do anything with that report now because it's going to be past 5 days. Mike?
Can they still back out of the deal if something came up at the home inspection?
No, not if it's after that 5 days.
Not if it's
Whatever
after
that
the 5
day
days.
period is.
Now, if it's after 5 days. Now, as an agent, we can absolutely communicate with the listing agent and say, hey, listen, I know we're past the 5-day inspection. I just got the report. Yesterday was the 5-day point. I got it today. Can we have an extension and get this to you tonight? Some listing agents will talk to the seller and be really nice and be like, you know what? Absolutely. The other percentage of listing agents will talk to the sellers and be like, nope, moving forward. And we're at the whims of that seller. We don't know what they're going to say. So we just need to prepare our buyers. Yeah. Lorraine, I'm really glad you brought that up because that is something that we are seeing in this industry. So it's really making sure our buyers are aware of what everything means to them.
I think another thing in a way of being proactive, when you're, you know, first talking to that listing agent and saying, hey, there's going to be an offer coming in tonight, tomorrow, whatever, I think you could say, are there certain things that are important? Just like you might say, you know, do they have a preferred settlement timeline? Do they want to settle in 30 days, 60 days, 45? Like, just like you might ask some of those questions, I think you could say, like, is the inspection timeline something that's important to them? Like, is there a certain, you know, they might tell you, they might give you some information. They might not, of course, they might say, no, give us your best offer. But, you know, they might, in some cases, if it is something that's important to them, say, yeah, we'd really like that inspection to happen within a week. Or they might say, no, whatever, just, you know, normal amount of time. Like, I think that's something you can at least ask, again, in an effort to try to be proactive, just like you might say, you know, are they preferring a shorter or a longer, you know, time till close?
Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that was as much of an issue. I was kind of surprised, so I appreciate you bringing that up as well. All right, and then it talks about rights and obligations of the buyer and seller and the turnaround time as far as once the inspection report is sent to the seller, then how long they have time, of course, to reply. One thing to watch out for too is if you, working with a buyer, send them a response and say, these are the things that my buyer would like fixed. There are a couple of ways in which the seller could respond. They could respond and say, yes, we'll fix these things. It could be all or some. It could be, no, we're not fixing anything. They could also choose to ignore it. If they do that, make sure you're paying attention to your time, because ignoring it doesn't mean that they're saying, yes, we'll fix everything. It actually means the opposite. It means we're going to ignore it. So at least at this point, we're not doing anything. And if you miss that opportunity, then to say, within those days to say, okay, well, if you're not going to respond and assume means you're not going to, kind of fix any of these things, you need to make sure that if your buyer wants to get out, they get out in that time frame, because if the seller ignores it and then the buyer doesn't do anything, you're moving along, right? There's no chance to get out. All right, so I'm going to explain B here as I understand it, and Alana and or David are going to either add to it or tell me if I'm wrong. But as I understand B, buyer's right, general right to terminate, this basically says, if initialed, that the buyer wants the chance to back out whenever for whatever reason. And so this is rarely, if ever, used, because most sellers are not going to want to just say, yeah, sure, free reign to back out whenever you want. So my understanding is that most people don't use this paragraph. Am I understanding that correctly? All right, cool. I was gonna say, if there's anything to add, but that is my understanding, that basically if your buyer initials this paragraph and there are multiple offers, that basically means yours is the first ignored.
Not ignored, but probably not accepted.
Right.
You're making
A huge amount, yeah.
20,000 over everybody else.
Yeah. Right, buyer's right to terminate contract, repairs, corrections, inspections, damage to property. All right, and then of course, signatures. All right, do you want to take over with as is? All right.
This is one that, the as is one that you are seeing a lot more right now in today's market. The as is can be used multiple different ways. One is the seller might be using the as is, saying, this property is sold as is, meaning we are, yes, you could do an inspection, but that's just to let the buyer know of things that may or may not be needed to fix on their end. It's the seller will not be doing any work on the house to sell their property. Here's my home, you're getting it as is, right? It's up to the buyer to say, okay, I will do as is without inspections, meaning, all right, I like what I see, I don't need inspections, I want the offer to go through, let me just buy the property. Or they'll do as is with inspections, which means, all right, I like the property, we're gonna go under contract, I'm still going to get an inspection done. And based on the inspection report, my buyer now has the right to now walk away. So if they go into a property that your buyer absolutely loves, and they get an inspection done, and the inspection comes back, and all of a sudden there's termites and mold and roof leaks and all these things, right? The seller is saying, we're not fixing any of that. So if you want to move in here, you're fixing it. The buyer, if they did as is with inspection, the buyer, if they agree to this, the buyer saying, okay, do I want to pay for this and move into my dream house and get these fixed? Or do I want to walk away and go look at new houses now and start over? That's up to the buyer. Again, these are buyer decisions. We do not make the decisions for the buyer. We educate them, but we don't decide, because we're not the ones forking out the $400,000 for a house. Oh, Allison, great question about the escalation. Going back to the escalation clause, if the price has changed, does it need to be updated on the offer or contract? No, because it's actually on the escalation clause at the bottom. It will be updated on that form. Great question. Here's an example. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but here's one example of a financing addendum. If your buyer is using a loan, they're going to need a financing addendum to sign and fill out. The financing addendum you're going to use is dependent on the type of loan, which you'll learn from the lender. Again, your relationship and communication with that lender directly is so, so important. Do not play what I call whisper down the lane, where you talk to the buyer talks to the lender, the buyer talks to the lender, the buyer talks to, like, don't play whisper down the lane where you never talk to the lender. Something will fall apart if that happens. You always want to have the connection with a lender. Think of the lender as your extension to your arm, your best friend in this deal. So the financing addendum will be whatever, could be conventional, could be FHA, could be VA. There's a lot of other types. And then the information in the loan details you're going to get from the lender, right? From that pre-approval letter. What's their loan amount? The term and the note. Again, these are all from the lender. What is the interest rate? You notice I didn't put anything here for a reason. I did not put an interest rate here because how often can interest rates change? Daily. So if you're all on this training today and we're recording this and I put in here 2.5 and an agent or one of you go back to this recording in a month and watch this, I didn't put a number in here simply because I don't want any of you looking at it and saying that's the interest rate. So you do need to put the number in here when submitting the offer, which again, you're getting from the lender. What type of loan program kind of matches the name of the addendum. Loan origination discount fees, you're gonna learn that information. Does your buyer have those from the lender? Are they paying it? What are those? Again, this form is a great conversation with the lender. Right? The lender is the one who's ordering the contingency. I'm sorry, I read the word contingency, appraisal contingency. Thank you. The appraisal, right? So if the appraised value of the property is less than the purchase price, what that means is if you have a buyer who is approved for a loan of $300,000 and the house they purchase is now appraised at $280,000, they cannot get a loan for $300,000 because the house wasn't appraised for that. They're going to get a loan for $280,000. So now the conversation is, number one, going to the listing agent and seeing, now that it's appraised and providing that proof, is the seller willing to drop it to what it was appraised for this settlement to move forward? Again, the seller might say yes or no. If the seller says yes, great, you move forward. If the seller says no, now the buyer has to determine, okay, do they really want the house and do they have an extra $20,000 in cash somewhere, or can they borrow from a family member to buy this house? Are they willing to do like a 50-50 where they ask the seller like, okay, we're willing to put up 10 if you're willing to drop it to 290, right? With a buyer, there's 3 negotiation points. One is the very beginning when you submit the offer. If everything goes through, right, let's say that goes back and forth in negotiations, then it gets approved and then there's inspection. Inspection time is another negotiation point, right? If the buyers are asking for something, they may or may not say yes or no to it. We're back to negotiations. Then it gets to appraisal point. If it appraises for that price or more, you have nothing to worry about. You move forward, you settle. If it appraises for less, we're back to negotiation points. Right? So there's 3 negotiation points through any buyer deal you're doing if there's a lender involved and inspection involved. Let me look at the chat box. Buyer can get gift from family member, not a loan. Yeah, buyer. In the very beginning, that's a great question. So in the very beginning of working with a buyer, we need to find out, how are they paying for their house?
What was the question?
Oh, the question was, sorry, let me repeat it. Thank you. Can a buyer get a gift from a family member and not a loan? Or it was buyer can get a gift from a family member, not a loan, question mark. So hopefully I'm hearing the question right and reading it correctly. If not, please come off of mute and interrupt me. There's so many different ways a buyer could purchase a home. The majority of buyers do need a loan, which is a mortgage, which is financing. Where I talked about the gift is, if in that scenario where the purchase price that we offered is that we're under contract for is 300,000, it appraises, the appraisal person says, nope, this house is worth 280. And the seller is not willing to drop it to 280. The buyer now has to make a decision. Do I walk away and start looking at other houses? Or I need to find $20,000 so I can give this seller $300,000, 280 from the loan, 20,000 from somewhere. So where's the 20,000 coming from? Right? That could literally be, I could physically call my brother up and be like, hey bro, I really want to buy this house. Would you spot me 20,000 to go to the settlement table and I'll pay you back, I promise? My brother might be like, you're crazy and hang up on me, but if he's really nice, he might be like, absolutely, here's 20,000. Let me just send it to you now. You put it in your bank. And it will be coming to the table with cash that I got from him. You might have a buyer who just has a big, huge savings account and is like, oh, not a problem. I have 20,000 just hanging out in my savings account. Let me just pull it from there. So when I talked a little while ago about you will never have two deals the same. Truly, because you don't know what's going to come back with inspections. You don't know how appraisals are going to go. We can be educated on certain ways to approach it, which is a lot of the trainings that we provide here and our coaching to educate your buyers and sellers. And at the end of the day, we don't know. There's a lot of until we know, we know.
Yeah, and if this happens, you're gonna want to talk to the lender, you're gonna want your buyer to talk to the lender, because there sometimes can be certain taxes if you're getting a large gift. So how is that going to affect the money that you're potentially someone else is helping you to get to? So talking with the lender, if it doesn't appraise and figuring out what your options are or what your buyer's options are is going to be really important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Making sure not only talking to the lender about taxes on any gifts you get or any money comes out of pocket, but also lenders have so many different options that they can maybe work with that buyer and provide. Going back to the lender and saying, okay, listen, how can we make this work? That's the lender now doing their job to figure out, is there a way to get this buyer pre-approved for more? Right? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. But that conversation with a lender, find out what options, what do they need to do, what taxes. That's so important. Thank you for bringing that up. Yep. So each of these paragraphs talks about just giving days, right? I put in a few examples here, but you're going to see if you line up 50 agents, every one of those 50 agents has a different number in this blank. Okay. There's no two the same here. So best practice, what this says is within 3 days of receiving the appraisal back, if it appraises for at the price or above, you're good. You move forward, settle. If it appraises for below, the buyer shall notify the seller in writing within 3 days of receipt of written appraisal with a copy of the appraisal and what the buyer is looking to do, right? Meaning, is the buyer asking the seller to drop the price? Is the buyer coming with money? What's happening? Okay. Oh, I need to update this because I don't know why I put 2 different dates in there. This is me working really fast. So upon receipt of written notice from buyer's request to reduce the purchase price to appraised value, seller upon written notice. So what this is saying is, okay, we now let the sellers know we want them to come down to meet that 280. And now we're giving the sellers 3 days to come back to us, which you could say 1 day, you could say 2 days, but we're giving the sellers, let's say 2 days to come back to us and say yes or no. So we're putting dates around it. So nobody's out there just kind of flailing around going, God, I hope I hear back from them soon. We're giving deadlines. And of course, everybody signs off on it. If your buyer, I'm just going to cover this really quick. If your buyer has a house that they are selling, so they're selling a house and they're buying a property, you need to ask them, do you need to sell in order to buy? If they say no, you don't need this form. If they say yes, that means their purchase of a property is contingent upon their sale of their current home, because they're probably using the cash from that sale to buy the property. So if they are selling a house in order to buy a property, you do need this form, because you do need to say when, what that contingency is and what some dates are. Okay. Again, you're going to see a lot of blanks where it talks about days, right? This is just giving, any blanks you see here, these are giving deadlines, right? So these are giving deadlines to the seller. These are giving deadlines to the buyer on when to basically null and void these contracts. Finally, and I think this is the last form on here.
I would gladly talk about this one. I had a seller contribution addendum when I bought my house. So earlier we talked about the escalation clause, and right, and how in this market that might be helpful. Well, in this market, this could potentially hurt you. Basically, not necessarily, but like there's a chance, and I'll kind of talk about why. The seller contribution addendum is basically saying that the buyer is requesting money from the seller, like the seller to bring money to the closing table. Now, chances are, if two offers are exactly equal, except one is asking for a seller contribution and one isn't, the one that isn't is going to be more favorable. But there's ways to get around this. So if you're working with a buyer that doesn't have enough money or enough money as they want, or, you know, and talking with the lender to bring to closing and they want some help from the seller, there are ways that potentially could make it a good offer. So if they're asking for $3,000, like this form is doing, you could potentially do $3,000 more than you were planning to offer for the total price of the home. So that way the seller is still netting the same amount, right? And that might be a way where financing it works, but you just they don't have that extra $3,000 to bring in cash. So that could be a way to kind of get around it, or even maybe offering more so they end up netting more than they would have expected. Like I said, not an immediate no in a market like this where it's competitive, but if there are multiple offers, upping the offer price can definitely help if they do need seller contribution. But you know, in some markets where it's a buyer's market, this may not be as big an issue. But like I said, in this market right now, chances are you're going to want to up, or at least talk to your buyer about potentially upping their offer if this is something they want to ask for. But they will say the sum or the percentage that they want help with.
As a seller contribution, again, conversation with the lender. You as the agent need to find out from the lender, how much money will this buyer need to bring to the closing table? How much money will they need to have? And then have a conversation with the buyer to find out, do they have that money? Because if the lender says they need $5,000 and the buyer says, I don't have $5,000, that's where this form has to come into play for them to actually purchase the house. Because now they need $5,000 in order to buy the house, right? In order to go to the settlement table. And to Rachel's point, which is perfect, is if they need $5,000, and they're offering 300,000, but they're, let's say, pre-approved for 325, they may want to up it to 305, or maybe 306, or maybe 310 to offset the help that the seller is going to give out. Questions on that at all? That can be confusing sometimes. It's not the easiest form. I'll take silence as a no. Did we go through all the forms?
Yeah, that's the end. That's page 34, 34.
Fantastic. Okay, so take yourselves off of mute, put it in the chat box. We're going to open this up. We're going to take about 10 minutes right now for any other questions that you guys have regarding anything we've gone through at all.
I'll also say, in case people are still thinking of their question and other people are thinking about maybe dropping out, we are going to have next week, I know we mentioned this at the beginning, but just reminding people, next week, we're going to go through contracts from the seller side or the listing agent side. But any questions you have now, shout them out, put them in the chat.
Next Thursday, January 13th, 1 to 3, mark your calendar, listing class, listing contracts. Thanks, Chanel.
I do have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Is it necessarily pertinent that you submit the escalation addendum with an offer? Because it could be a case where your offer is good without the escalation addendum. And if you submit it with that offer, it could hinder the buyer with the price increase. I mean, would they have?
What I would say is the escalation, you don't have to. You could do an offer without that. What we're saying is that can be a tool in a competitive market if they really want the house. Like if they're offering 300,000, but they don't want to lose it if it goes up to 315, then that can be a time where that's really helpful. But if 300,000 is their max and they're giving their best offer, then you're not going to need that. If you talk to the agent and they say, you know, we don't have any offers and you're going to be the first and only offer, you're not going to need that escalation clause. But if you talk to someone and they want the house and then you're talking to a listing agent and they say, listen, we have 3 other offers coming in.
Gotcha.
And again, the escalation only comes in if there is an offer over theirs. Like if you offer, right, proof has to be come through. So if your buyer says 300,000 and everyone's less than that, that escalation won't come into play because you are the best offer price wise.
So the seller wouldn't necessarily take the escalation offer. So if my offer was the best offer to begin with, and I submit the escalation offer along with the offer the first time, which price would they go with?
If yours is the best offer price wise, if you say 300,000 and 290 and 280 come through, they can't escalate the price. The escalation is based on them getting another offer that is higher than your own.
Okay, that's what I wanted to find out. Okay.
It cannot hurt your buyer at all.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
I see in the chat box, sharing a list of possible buyer contract forms. We do have checklists that we can provide. What I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to put our coach's email in the chat box. Okay, so that is our group email, kwlcoach@kw.com. If you email that box and ask for checklists, we will absolutely send them to you.
In case someone other than myself or Alana see it first, specifically say buyer contract form checklist, because then that way, like if Melissa, who's not in the room, sees it, she'll know what you're asking for.
Yeah. We have a lot of checklists, by the way, for everything. So yes.
You can also use that for other questions, not just to ask for resources, but.
Oh, absolutely. That's the best way to reach the coaching department is that email address. It's monitored by the entire coaching department here, so that we can get to you and support you even faster. All right. Any other questions? All right, guys, thank you so much for attending today. We hope to see all of you next week, Thursday, 1 o'clock for the listing contracts. Oh, wait, I see a question. Recorded sessions, great question. We send out, we have a YouTube channel they all get posted on. And we also email a newsletter every Sunday. If you are with Keller Williams Legacy and you're not receiving your newsletter on Sunday, please let us know so we can make sure we have the right email address for you. If you're joining us today from another brokerage, welcome. All of our trainings are free and open to every agent. If we help one agent succeed and be successful, it absolutely it helps all of us. So if you are from another company, please email to KWL Coach and we can get you the recording. Perfect. All right, everybody, have a great day, and everybody go find a buyer or seller so you can actually write a contract.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.